December 1944, the Ardennes forest lay blanketed in snow, deceptively quiet, as if the earth itself held its breath. From a frozen hilltop, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe surveyed the town of Bastogne, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. 18,000 American soldiers, a mix of infantry, artillery, and scattered support units, were stationed within the perimeter. They were team-deased, poorly supplied, and ill-prepared for the approaching storm. Yet their commander refused to entertain retreat. Reports arrived in rapid succession. 5 German Panzer divisions, veterans hardened on the Eastern Front, were advancing with brutal efficiency through Belgian towns. Command staff had suggested withdrawing to a more defensible position, but McAuliffe's response was a single word: nuts. It was both defiance and a call to arms, a refusal to surrender Bastogne to the mechanized fury bearing down on them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The roads leading into the town were narrow, snow-choked, and already clogged with retreating troops and fleeing civilians, a tangled mess of wagons, trucks, and horses that slowed every movement. Engineers worked furiously, constructing barricades and trenches, while artillery crews emplaced mines along the roads and prepared their cannons. Medics moved among the soldiers, tending to wounds from previous skirmishes, their hands raw from the cold. Snowflakes fell lightly, drifting over frozen mud and the glinting metal of weapons, as though nature itself were cloaking the carnage to come. The quiet was thick with anticipation, a tense hush that betrayed the men's knowledge of the horror about to unfold. By midday, the first German reconnaissance units appeared along the horizon, small columns of mechanized infantry and half-tracks, their armor gleaming against the white forest. From the tree line, American scouts exchanged short, deadly bursts of rifle fire, the crack of the Springfield rifles echoing off snow-laden branches. These skirmishes were minor in the scale of the battle, yet each one slowed the German advance and provided crucial intelligence. Soldiers whispered prayers, muttered curses at the cruelty of war, and checked the weapons that might be their only salvation. Every inch of ground became a contest of wills. The snow underfoot was mixed with red in places, tiny signs of the blood that would stain Bastogne over the coming days. Inside the town, civilians moved with quiet fear, dragging what little they could carry through the streets, their breath forming clouds in the icy air. Women and children crouched in cellars, while elderly men attempted to keep watch from windows or rooftops. The once peaceful town was transformed into a fortress almost overnight, its cobbled streets lined with hastily dug trenches and sandbags. Every doorway a potential firing position. Soldiers moved with urgency, hauling ammunition and food supplies to the barricades. Every crate counted. Every barrel of fuel could mean the difference between holding or losing Bastogne. McAuliffe's voice, calm but commanding, traveled from unit to unit. Hold them. We give them nothing. Not an inch. Not a breath. Bastogne stands. The artillery positions were a chaotic ballet of snow, metal, and smoke. Cannons were positioned in the central square, their crews working tirelessly, preparing for a bombardment that would come sooner than any soldier dared anticipate. Soldiers pored over maps, noting every road, every ridge, every approach that could be used by the enemy. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Harper, commanding the artillery battalion, paced in front of the guns, his fingers tracing the snow-dusted map lines. "Adjust for 1,000 meters," he barked, his voice sharp. "The Panzers are fast, but their wheels bite poorly in snow. Let them taste our fire." The men nodded, hurrying to prepare shells and adjust targeting. Each movement was deliberate, each calculation vital. There would be no second chance once the German armor arrived. Out on the perimeter, the infantry dug in along the approaches to the town. Soldiers shivered in layers of uniform, their faces pale from cold and anxiety. The youngest men, barely 18, checked their rifles again and again, their fingers raw from frostbite. Veterans of previous campaigns offered silent guidance, positioning the rookies along the most vulnerable stretches of road. Sergeant William "Bill" Thompson knelt beside Private James Callahan, showing him the sight picture through the scope of his rifle. "Don't flinch," he whispered. "Your finger's the difference between life and death." Callahan nodded, swallowing hard, his teeth chattering from both fear and cold. Every American in Bastogne knew the odds were against them. 5 panzer divisions meant hundreds of armored vehicles, thousands of infantry and artillery support that could reduce a town to rubble in hours. Yet, their resolve did not waver. As afternoon crept into evening, reports of German advances filtered in from nearby villages. The 48th Infantry, fresh from rest and assigned to rearguard duty, encountered enemy scouts near Foy and Libremont. American officers improvised on the fly, directing mixed groups of soldiers, artillerymen, and engineers to engage the enemy and delay their movement. Tanks were scarce, ammunition limited, yet every soldier contributed to a network of resistance that made the German timetable unworkable. Each hour gained for Bastogne meant a strategic advantage for the Allies elsewhere on the Western Front. McAuliffe understood this fully. He paced along the command post, checking communications, relaying orders, and observing the men. He was neither reckless nor naive. He simply recognized the necessity of holding Bastogne at all costs. Evening brought a bitter wind, cutting through wool uniforms and steel helmets alike. Fires burned in the town square, offering little warmth, but a faint glow to guide medics moving among the wounded. The men of the 101st Airborne, though exhausted from previous campaigns, arrived piecemeal to reinforce the town. They were the Screaming Eagles, elite soldiers famed for their resilience. Yet even they paused at the gates, noting the snow, the confusion, the uncertainty. Their sergeants barked orders: distribute ammunition, check weapons, dig in. Time was fleeting. Every delay increased the risk that the German panzers would arrive before the town was ready. Night fell, and with it a strange, eerie calm. Bastogne, though alive with movement, seemed almost suspended, as if the forest itself had paused to watch. Snow muffled the sounds of distant artillery, yet the ground trembled faintly as German columns approached. Soldiers lit cigarettes where they could, their flickering flames reflecting the tension in their eyes. Letters were written hurriedly to wives and mothers, scraps of paper to be sent if survival allowed. McAuliffe moved among his officers once more, ensuring coordination between artillery, infantry, and engineers. "We hold," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. "No retreat. Nothing leaves Bastogne. Not today, not tomorrow." Scouts returned with grim news. The enemy was closer than anticipated, their lead vehicles already sighted near long stretches of frozen road. Artillery batteries fired warning rounds, small explosions echoing across the snow-covered fields, marking positions for enemy observation. Every action, every movement, carried the weight of life or death. Soldiers whispered to one another, "Hold fast, stay alive." The forest, silent and looming, seemed to lean in, watching, waiting, as if understanding the gravity of what was about to unfold. By midnight, Bastogne was fully encircled in spirit, if not yet in position. McAuliffe, standing in the command post, reviewed reports from every sector, noting supply levels, troop readiness, and defensive positions. The panzers would arrive by morning. Their timetable was exacting, their intent clear. But within Bastogne, an unspoken determination held sway. Soldiers, men who had never fought together before, now shared a common resolve. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a mechanized force that could obliterate any town in its path, yet their courage was steadfast. In that cold December night, the seed of the siege was sown, and the Americans of Bastogne prepared to write a story of endurance that would echo through history. The first skirmishes began as flares illuminated the forest. Shadows moved among trees, rifles cracked in short, controlled bursts. Engineers adjusted mines, artillery crews loaded shells, medics braced for the wounded, and infantrymen whispered prayers into frozen winds. Every soldier knew the coming hours would test the limits of endurance, ingenuity, and courage. Yet in the midst of fear and snow, McAuliffe's defiance, "Nuts!" became a rallying cry, a spark that would ignite the fierce resistance to come. Bastogne would stand, and within the quiet, frozen Ardennes forest, a storm was gathering, its fury to be unleashed by morning. By nightfall, the German forces pressed forward with relentless precision, their panzers cutting through the Ardennes forest like knives through paper, the crunch of steel tracks on frozen earth echoing through the darkened trees. Bastogne's defenders were stretched to the limit, every man aware that the enemy's mechanized divisions were closing in from every direction. The first units of the 101st Airborne Division arrived. Paratroopers exhausted from forced marches through icy rain, their boots soaked, their uniforms stiff with frozen mud, and their supplies dangerously low. Trucks and half-tracks choked the narrow roads leading into the town, creating snarls that slowed both reinforcements and retreating civilians alike. Ammunition was scarce, food even scarcer, and yet morale clung stubbornly to the soldiers, a fragile but crucial lifeline. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe moved swiftly among ad hoc units he had improvised, pressing engineers and supply men into combat roles, positioning artillery to dominate choke points, and sending scouts through treacherous snow-covered terrain to monitor flanking maneuvers. Every step was deliberate, every action weighed against the ticking clock of the enemy's advance. The town itself transformed almost overnight into a labyrinthine fortress. Rubble barricaded the streets, tanks were dug into defensive positions at critical intersections, and every home, church, and school became a potential strongpoint, each man prepared to hold it at all costs. McAuliffe's orders, crisp and unyielding, spread through the ranks. Hold, Bastogne. Nothing moves without our say. Soldiers reinforced walls with sandbags, bolstered doors with beams torn from nearby structures, and piled debris to channel enemy vehicles into kill zones. Engineers rigged explosives under bridges and along roads, detonating them as German columns approached to slow the advance. Each explosion echoed through the valley, a violent punctuation against the soft fall of snow and the crackle of distant artillery. The Germans, confident in their ability to overwhelm the town quickly, underestimated the ingenuity and resilience of the Americans who faced them. McAuliffe's improvisation, combined with the determination of his troops, forced the enemy to pause and recalibrate, buying hours that would prove invaluable in the coming siege. The first skirmishes erupted under the cover of darkness. German reconnaissance patrols, probing the perimeter for weak points, found themselves ambushed by paratroopers lying in wait behind snow-laden hedgerows and within the skeletons of abandoned houses. Rifle fire cracked sharply through the night, punctuated by the thunder of artillery and the occasional roar of a Sherman tank engaging a Panzer. Smoke and fire blurred the line between town and battlefield as burning vehicles illuminated the snow-covered streets in flickering orange light. Soldiers moved with grim efficiency, hauling ammunition to firing positions, reinforcing barricades, and tending to the wounded, while keeping watch for the next enemy push. Every American in Bastogne, from the youngest private barely 18 years old to seasoned officers, understood that the survival of the town rested on collective effort, cunning, and sheer stubbornness. By midnight, the snow intensified, turning streets into treacherous ice paths and slowing movement for both sides. German armor, though formidable, struggled on the slippery terrain, their wheels spinning uselessly against packed snow, while American defenders exploited every natural and improvised obstacle. Infantrymen laid traps along narrow roads, rigging mines and booby traps with meticulous care. Each detonation a calculated strike to inflict maximum disruption on enemy formations. Artillery observers, perched atop frozen rooftops and church steeples, called in fire missions with precision, targeting advancing vehicles and supply convoys. Explosions rocked the night, sending clouds of snow and debris into the air, yet the defenders held their ground, reinforced by the indomitable spirit instilled by their commander. The sense of encirclement, far from inducing despair, steeled the soldiers' resolve. Bastogne would not surrender quietly, nor would it crumble under the initial weight of German might. Throughout the night, McAuliffe coordinated defenses with a combination of strategic foresight and adaptive improvisation. Communications lines were fragile, radios prone to frost-induced failure, yet orders flowed through runners and signal flares with remarkable efficiency. Each sector was assigned overlapping responsibilities, riflemen supported machine gunners, engineers reinforced artillery crews, and medics doubled as auxiliary riflemen when needed. Reports of enemy movement trickled in continuously, columns approaching from Foy, patrols probing Libramont, and armored units stalled along icy roads. Each update prompted immediate action, Barricades were reinforced, trenches deepened, and artillery recalibrated to cover every conceivable approach. Soldiers, despite fatigue and cold that gnawed at their fingers and faces, moved with disciplined urgency, aware that hesitation could mean catastrophe. By the early hours of morning, Bastogne resembled a town under siege in every sense. The streets were fortified with barricades of rubble, timber, and sandbags. Every building held the potential for ambush, and improvised gun emplacements bristled along ridges and narrow alleys. German engineers attempted to breach defenses, only to be met by a withering crossfire of rifles, machine guns, and artillery shells. Explosions shattered the silence of the frozen night, sending showers of snow and splintered wood into the air. Tanks engaged in duels that left craters in the streets, while infantrymen flanked from concealed positions, harassing enemy movements. The combination of American ingenuity, terrain advantage, and sheer willpower slowed the German timetable considerably. Each delay, each frustrated advance, was a small victory that reinforced morale and strengthened Bastogne's defenses. Further, supplies remained critically low, and yet soldiers pressed forward, improvising where necessary. Canned rations were rationed carefully, chocolate and coffee treasured for both energy and morale. Medical personnel worked tirelessly, stitching wounds with frozen fingers, moving wounded men to safer positions, and sometimes leaving their stations to join the fight. Each act of endurance, each moment of bravery, contributed to the greater defense of the town. McAuliffe's leadership, calm under pressure, yet uncompromising in expectation, inspired men who had endured exhaustion, cold, and fear to continue fighting. His defiance, once expressed as a single word, nuts, had become a symbol of resistance, a spark that ignited a collective determination. By mid-morning, the Germans had begun to probe the town from multiple directions. Reconnaissance units encountered ambushes at every turn, but Samsin, while tanks found themselves funneled into narrow streets where artillery fire and concealed anti-tank weapons awaited. Every engagement, no matter how small, carried immense weight. Soldiers exchanged fire from windows and rooftops, tossing grenades into streets and alleyways, while artillery pounded the advancing columns. Smoke and dust mingled with falling snow, obscuring vision and creating a surreal landscape of chaos. In these conditions, the ingenuity and improvisation of American forces proved decisive. Bridges destroyed by engineers forced enemy vehicles to reroute, slowing momentum. Mines claimed the first panzers to venture too far ahead. The Germans, expecting quick success, encountered resistance that was methodical, fierce, and unrelenting. The encirclement tightened as the day progressed. German units, frustrated by delays and unexpected casualties, attempted to consolidate their positions, only to find the town itself transformed into an obstacle course of destruction. Every building became a bastion, each street a defensive network, every snow-covered field a trap. American soldiers, shivering but resolute, moved tirelessly between positions, reinforcing defenses and coordinating fire. Messages were relayed by runners through the streets, signal flares marked enemy positions, and artillery observers directed destructive fire with unerring accuracy. Even with dwindling ammunition, improvisation allowed defenders to hold key positions, forcing the enemy to expend resources and time on limited gains. By evening, Bastogne had become a true fortress under siege. Snow continued to fall, muffling distant artillery and enemy movements, yet amplifying the tension within the town. Streets glowed with fires from destroyed vehicles, shadows danced across barricades, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Soldiers huddled for brief respite, sharing chocolate, coffee, and brief words of encouragement. Medics continued their work, patching wounds while maintaining vigilance against further attack. Despite exhaustion, morale remained surprisingly high. The townspeople, though frightened, observed and assisted where possible, reinforcing barricades, delivering messages, and offering sustenance. Bastogne had become a collective effort, a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Night fell again, this time heavier, thicker, almost suffocating. The encirclement was complete. German forces had surrounded the town, yet their advance had been slowed and frustrated at every opportunity. Explosions punctuated the darkness, rifles cracked in measured bursts, and artillery boomed across the snow-covered landscape. Every man, whether combatant or civilian, understood the gravity of the siege that had begun. McAuliffe, pacing the command post, observed maps and reports with a calm intensity, issuing orders that would shape the next phase of the battle. His leadership, the ingenuity of his officers, and the determination of the soldiers had transformed Bastogne from a vulnerable town into a defiant stronghold. As the night deepened, Bastogne settled into an uneasy rhythm. Soldiers maintained watch, artillery crews adjusted positions, and engineers prepared further obstacles for the advancing enemy. The Germans, despite their numerical superiority and mechanized strength, had been slowed, frustrated, and forced to engage in costly probing attacks. Every hour gained strengthened the town's defenses and allowed reinforcements and supplies to trickle in from surrounding units. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne, though weary and undersupplied, moved with purpose, integrating into defensive positions and preparing for the inevitable assaults to come. Bastogne had become more than a town under siege. It had become a symbol of resistance, a testament to strategy, courage, and human determination against the overwhelming might of the German war machine. By the end of Act II, the stage was set for the full-scale assault that would define Bastogne. The snow-covered streets, fortified barricades, and determined defenders represented a town prepared to endure, to resist, and to defy expectations. McAuliffe's decisions, the soldiers' improvisation, and the sheer force of will had bought precious time, delayed the enemy, and transformed a seemingly indefensible position into a fortress. The night of encirclement had passed, and with the rising sun, the battle for Bastogne would enter its next, most brutal chapter. The Americans had proven that numbers alone could not break determination, that courage and ingenuity could hold a line against overwhelming force, and that in the Ardennes, the spirit of Bastogne was not yet broken. Dawn broke over Bastogne, pale and grey, the snow-covered streets shimmering under the weak winter light as the first echoes of artillery fire erupted across the town. German Panzers, armored columns gleaming like steel leviathans, barreled down icy roads toward the town center, their engines growling, tracks cutting through the snow in long, deep furrows. Yet, every advance was met with fierce American resistance. Minefields, painstakingly laid overnight, ripped through the tracks of leading tanks, sending twisted metal skidding across the frozen streets, smoke curling into the grey sky. Anti-tank fire erupted from concealed positions, knocking out vehicles before they could reach the town's barricades. Infantrymen advanced between the armored columns, rifles and machine guns spitting lead, cutting down anyone exposed, forcing German soldiers to scatter into ditches, behind walls and across open, snow-laden fields. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe coordinated defenses by radio, his calm, commanding voice slicing through the chaos. Hold positions. No retreat. Each word reinforced the will of the soldiers, instilling courage amid the maelstrom of smoke, fire, and steel. House to house, street to street, the Americans fought with ingenuity and determination. Paratroopers lobbed Molotov cocktails through shattered windows, grenades arced across barricades, and engineers detonated obstacles with precise timing to halt armored columns. Artillery crews, braving frozen fingers and gusting wind, trained their guns on every gap in the enemy lines, ensuring that advancing vehicles and troops would be met with thunderous resistance. The German forces, confident in their numerical and mechanized superiority, were caught unprepared by the intensity and coordination of the defenders. Snow, which had seemed a hindrance, became a weapon in its own right, slowing movement and amplifying the effectiveness of traps, ambushes, and artillery fire. Every street became a killing ground, every intersection a battleground. Buildings that once housed families were now fortresses, each wall reinforced with sandbags, timber, and rubble, hiding riflemen who awaited the next wave. Casualties mounted on both sides. Men slipped and fell on the icy roads, wounded by rifle fire, machine gun bursts, or exploding shells. The cries of the injured mingled with the roar of artillery, creating a surreal symphony of war. Medical personnel worked tirelessly, moving across frozen streets to patch wounds, drag the injured to relative safety, and provide words of encouragement even as shells shook the ground beneath them. Despite hunger, freezing cold, and exhaustion, the defenders pressed on, knowing that each hour they held Bastogne delayed the German timetable, critical to the larger plan of slowing Hitler's offensive. McAuliffe moved among the troops with steady determination, offering a hand on a shoulder, a word of praise, a nod of recognition to the men who fought tirelessly around him. His presence, calm and resolute, became a beacon, a reminder that the town's survival rested on courage, discipline, and sheer willpower. The Germans launched repeated assaults. Tanks tried to force entry through the main streets, only to be funneled into narrow lanes lined with mines and surrounded by heavy rifle and machine gun fire. Infantry surged forward in waves, attempting to flank American positions, but found themselves under enfilading fire from rooftops and barricades. Explosions shook the ground, sending shards of wood, brick, and ice into the air. Smoke from burning vehicles created a haze that blurred visibility, yet the Americans used the chaos to their advantage, slipping between shadows, repositioning artillery, and tightening defenses. Every advance the Germans made was costly, slowing momentum and reinforcing the defenders' determination. Reinforcements trickled in where possible, and soldiers shared ammunition, food, and water in hushed, hurried exchanges amid the ongoing battle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. By mid-morning, Bastogne had become a labyrinth of fire, smoke, and destruction. Streets were impassable in many areas, blocked by wrecked vehicles, collapsed buildings, and barricades. Tanks that had broken through initial obstacles were immobilized by mines or disabled by artillery fire, their crews forced to abandon them under hailstorms of bullets. Soldiers advanced with methodical care, clearing streets house by house, clearing rooms and courtyards of any enemy presence. Paratroopers moved from building to building, sometimes encountering enemy soldiers holed up in attics or basements, exchanging fire in tense, deadly encounters. Engineers demolished bridges and cleared obstacles where necessary, while artillery observers on rooftops calculated trajectories to crush any new threats. Bastogne, though battered and burning in places, remained unconquered. A testament to the defenders' ingenuity and resolve. Snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, icing over streets and covering the debris of battle. The cold was bitter, seeping through uniforms, freezing fingers and toes. Yet, Americans pressed forward. Soldiers shouted encouragement, fired with steady hands, and adapted tactics to exploit terrain and weather. Molotovs ignited in alleyways, explosions erupted from buried charges, and every defensive measure was executed with precision. The German troops, though well-trained and experienced, were frustrated by delays, forced to confront the unyielding determination of men fighting for their town and their lives. Artillery boomed, rifles cracked, and the ground shook with every detonation. Yet Bastogne remained defiant, a fortress carved from steel, snow, and courage. McAuliffe's command post became a hub of unbroken focus. Reports of enemy movements, incoming requests for artillery, and updates on casualties flowed in continuously. Decisions were made swiftly, each one calibrated to maximize resistance and minimize unnecessary loss of life. Soldiers were repositioned based on real-time intelligence. Flanking maneuvers were anticipated and countered. Artillery fire was concentrated on enemy clusters with deadly accuracy. Each action demonstrated the importance of strategy, coordination, and leadership amid chaos. The Americans understood that their efforts were more than mere defense. They were a statement, a demonstration that a town encircled and outnumbered could endure, resist, and fight back. As afternoon approached, the German assaults began to waver under the weight of repeated losses. Tanks that advanced too quickly were destroyed by mines or anti-tank fire. Infantry units became entangled in barricaded streets and fortified buildings, suffering high casualties in close-quarters combat. American soldiers, though fatigued and hungry, exploited every weakness, firing from elevated positions, tossing grenades into doorways, and coordinating artillery strikes that shattered enemy formations. Smoke from destroyed vehicles mingled with the falling snow, creating an eerie, otherworldly landscape in which every movement could be lethal. Civilians who had remained in basements or makeshift shelters emerged cautiously, helping where possible, carrying messages, and providing aid to the wounded. Bastogne, though under siege, had become a collective effort, its defense a testament to human resilience. Evening descended with the town still burning in places, streets scarred with craters, and buildings shattered by relentless shelling. Soldiers rotated positions, taking brief moments to eat, drink, and rest, though sleep was impossible amid the continuing threat of attack. Artillery continued to fire, rifles cracked intermittently, and tanks remained immobilized or destroyed in strategic choke points. McAuliffe moved through the ruins, assessing morale, issuing orders, and reinforcing the resolve of the men who had endured countless hours of unyielding combat. Each hour, the town held delayed the German timetable, forcing the enemy to expend ammunition, manpower, and morale against a determined opponent. Nightfall brought a tense calm. The snow muffled distant artillery, creating a deceptive quiet over the town. Soldiers maintained watch, rifles trained on likely avenues of approach, while engineers reinforced barricades and prepared new obstacles. Fires from earlier engagements continued to burn, providing light but also revealing positions to the enemy. Communications, though strained, were maintained by runners, signal flares, and radio transmissions, ensuring coordination across the town. The Germans, frustrated and slowed by the fierce resistance, regrouped and prepared for further assaults, unaware that every failed advance strengthened the Americans' control of key positions and heightened morale among defenders. By the end of Act 3, Bastogne had endured a full day of firestorm. Tanks lay twisted and burning in streets, barricades held firm, and American soldiers, though weary, remained vigilant and resolute. Casualties were heavy, but the town's defenses had held, demonstrating that courage, ingenuity, and leadership could compensate for numerical inferiority. McAuliffe's calm authority, combined with the soldiers' skill and determination, had transformed a town facing annihilation into a bastion of resistance. Every hour that Bastogne held the German forces delayed Hitler's broader offensive, providing time for reinforcements and demonstrating the power of resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. The snow-covered town, scarred and battered, yet unbroken, stood as a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the indomitable will to survive and resist. Encircled and cut off, Bastogne's defenders endured the full weight of winter and war, snow falling relentlessly as the grey sky pressed down over the town. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, biting through uniforms, gloves, and makeshift shelters, numbing fingers and toes and sapping energy with every movement. Inside the snow-choked streets, soldiers moved with painstaking care, their boots crunching on ice, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Supplies dwindled alarmingly. Food, once modest but sufficient, now became a precious commodity, measured carefully, shared sparingly, and rationed to maintain strength for continued resistance. Ammunition was hoarded, counted, and conserved, each bullet fired, weighed against necessity, each shell measured for maximum effect. Medical supplies were equally precious. Bandages, morphine, and antiseptics were rationed. The medics, working tirelessly to stabilize the wounded in improvised shelters, dragging men from freezing streets into basements, cellars, and makeshift tents hastily erected in courtyards. The German siege intensified, with relentless artillery barrages that shook the ground, pulverized buildings, and splintered streets, turning snow and ice into a mix of mud and blood. Explosions rocked the town at irregular intervals, creating a disorienting rhythm of shock and chaos. German infantry probed defensive positions with persistent aggression, attempting to breach barricades, yet each advance was met with calculated, deadly resistance. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles, destroyed armor, and civilian refugees made maneuvering treacherous for the attackers, while American soldiers exploited every choke point, every hidden alley, and every improvised defensive position to exact maximum cost on their enemies. Snipers, hidden in ruined rooftops, chimneys, and church towers, picked off officers and key targets, slowing German coordination and eroding morale. Small unit tactics became the lifeblood of Bastogne's defense. Teams of infantry, engineers, and even support personnel, drivers, cooks, and clerks, were pressed into combat, laying traps, setting demolition charges, and harassing German flanks with precise, unexpected attacks. McAuliffe, calm and resolute amid the chaos, received repeated requests for surrender from German envoys, letters and verbal messages delivered under flags of truce, urging him to save lives by giving in to overwhelming force. He responded with the single defiant word, "Nuts." The reply, simple yet unmistakable, galvanized his men, spreading through the ranks like wildfire, reinforcing the unyielding determination to hold the town. Soldiers, inspired by their commander's courage, endured hardships with renewed resolve, their morale buoyed even as snow, cold, hunger and exhaustion gnawed at their bodies. Fires were kept burning in chimneys and makeshift stoves, offering fragile warmth and a psychological anchor amid endless grey skies, the smoke curling through shattered roofs and chimneys. Each day brought new horrors and new tests. Roads clogged with German fuel trucks exploded spectacularly when sabotaged by engineers, flames consuming the ice-covered vehicles and sending shrapnel flying into approaching infantry. Barricades held firm against repeated armored assaults, and every captured street became another killing ground for defenders. Artillery observers, perched precariously on ruined rooftops, directed devastating fire against enemy columns, timing each salvo to maximize destruction while conserving scarce shells. American troops adapted constantly, shifting positions, setting ambushes, and reinforcing weak points under the constant threat of shelling. The town became a living maze of defensive ingenuity, each street a testament to human resilience, each building a symbol of improvisation and defiance. Wounded soldiers endured the cold and pain with stoic determination, many refusing to leave positions even when injured. Medics, exhausted and running low on supplies, moved tirelessly among them, improvising splints, stitching wounds and administering last resort treatments to keep men alive. The cries of the injured, the groan of snow-laden timbers, the roar of artillery, and the distant rumble of German armor created a relentless soundtrack of war that never ceased. Yet, amid this constant pressure, small victories sustained the defenders' spirits. A barricade held against repeated assault, a tank destroyed before reaching the town center, an enemy officer eliminated by a sniper, a truckload of ammunition captured from the foe. Each success, however small, reinforced the conviction that Bastogne could withstand the siege. The snow, once merely an obstacle, became a weapon in the hands of the defenders. Icy roads slowed German movement, forcing armored columns into narrow lanes where they could be destroyed with concentrated fire. Frozen rivers and creeks prevented flanking maneuvers, while hidden pitfalls and improvised traps turned the environment against the enemy. Engineers created ice-covered obstacles that appeared as natural terrain, but concealed deadly surprises beneath. Streets, courtyards, and alleys were fortified with rubble, logs, and sandbags, transforming familiar townscapes into complex defensive networks. Every movement by the enemy was anticipated, observed, and countered with lethal precision. Inside the town, the human element remained central to the defense. Soldiers huddled together for warmth during brief moments of respite, sharing meager rations, stories, and quiet laughter that defied the surrounding terror. Leaders rotated positions to inspire troops, checking on morale, reinforcing defenses, and encouraging the weary to continue fighting. McAuliffe moved among his men with calm authority, offering praise where earned, guidance where needed, and reassurance when fear threatened to take hold. The presence of leadership, tangible and unwavering, became a psychological anchor as essential as artillery or barricades. Allied air support, expected in previous campaigns, was non-existent due to the cloud-choked skies. Fighter bombers remained grounded, and reconnaissance aircraft could not fly, leaving the defenders reliant solely on ingenuity, improvisation, and determination. Communication lines, stretched and fragile, were maintained through runners, signal flares, and radios under constant threat from artillery and snipers. Every decision, from the placement of a single gun to the timing of an ambush, had critical implications for the survival of the town and the men within it. The German commanders, frustrated by repeated failures, began reconsidering their strategies, forced to allocate additional resources to break Bastogne, draining manpower, fuel, and ammunition from other sectors of the offensive. Night brought new challenges. Temperatures plunged further, and the constant bombardment left streets illuminated by intermittent flashes of fire and explosions. Soldiers maintained vigilance, each man knowing that the momentary lapse of another could cost the town its defense. Fires from previous engagements offered warmth and light, but also drew attention from enemy artillery and snipers. Every building was inspected, reinforced, and prepared for night assaults. Every alley was patrolled, every rooftop manned. Civilian volunteers, where safely possible, assisted in moving supplies, aiding medics, and reinforcing barricades, demonstrating a collective resilience that transcended military duty. The German forces launched probing attacks under cover of darkness, attempting to exploit weaknesses in the frozen labyrinth. Each assault was met with carefully prepared traps, sniper fire, and pre-planned artillery strikes, resulting in heavy casualties. Soldiers adapted quickly, moving to cover, countering flanking maneuvers, and improvising defenses where gaps appeared. Every failed assault strengthened the defenders' confidence and demonstrated the futility of underestimating their resolve. Bastogne, though battered, freezing, and isolated, remained defiant, its fortifications holding against superior numbers and relentless pressure. By the end of the fourth day, Bastogne had endured more than the Germans had anticipated. Snow-covered streets, craters from artillery, burnt-out tanks, and barricaded intersections told the story of fierce resistance. Morale remained remarkably high, despite exhaustion, hunger, and cold. McAuliffe's single word, "nuts," had become a mantra, encapsulating the town's defiance and determination. The German commanders, forced to commit more troops, more resources, and more time than planned, were compelled to reconsider their offensive timetable. Bastogne's defense had bought precious time for Allied reinforcements, disrupted German coordination, and showcased the effectiveness of ingenuity, leadership, and unyielding willpower in the face of overwhelming adversity. The night ended with the town battered but unbroken. Soldiers rotated through watchposts, medics stabilized the wounded, and leaders reinforced defenses. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in white, covering the scars of battle but not the resolve of its defenders. Bastogne had become more than a town. It was a symbol of resistance, a testament to human courage, and a demonstration that even the most dire circumstances could be overcome with determination, coordination, and steadfast leadership. Each hour, the siege continued. Each attack repelled, strengthened the Americans' position, and weakened the enemy's resolve. In the frozen, snowbound streets, the struggle continued, a relentless, grueling fight that tested every man, yet revealed the extraordinary depth of endurance, bravery, and strategic skill. December 17th dawned cold and grey over Bastogne, the town still bearing the scars of relentless siege, streets littered with rubble, frozen vehicles, and the remnants of barricades erected in desperation. The snow that had fallen continuously for days now glistened in the pale morning light, turning the town into a frozen battlefield. Yet beneath the white blanket, the echoes of heroism and suffering were etched in every street, every ruined building. American soldiers, weary beyond measure, had endured freezing temperatures, dwindling rations, scarce ammunition, and constant German bombardment. Yet they had held their ground. The arrival of Allied reinforcements under General George S. Patton's Third Army was a moment that would be remembered as both miraculous and decisive. Columns of tanks, infantry, and armored vehicles carved paths through the snow-covered Ardennes forest, moving with deliberate urgency to strike the German flanks and relieve the besieged defenders. The ground trembled beneath the advancing armor, a sound that mixed awe with hope, and soldiers who had spent nights under continuous fire emerged from barricades to witness the long-awaited reinforcements approaching their positions. Exhausted men, some still covered in frost, some clutching rifles with numb fingers, looked up with disbelief and mounting joy. The sound of engines, the sight of familiar Allied insignia, and the unmistakable roar of tanks gave rise to shouts of elation, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and victory. Men collapsed onto frozen streets, some burying their faces in the snow, tears mingling with frostbite, while others embraced comrades, soldiers who had survived together, enduring the impossible, now finally reinforced. Medical personnel, stretched to the limit for days, moved quickly to stabilize the wounded and exhausted, assisted by fresh medics and supplies flowing in with the incoming columns. Food, hot coffee, and blankets became available once more, reviving spirits that had been sustained by sheer determination alone. The human toll of the siege was visible everywhere. Faces etched with fatigue, hands raw and chapped from the cold, uniforms tattered and soaked with blood, snow, and mud, but the overwhelming emotion was relief, a tangible sense that the nightmare had finally passed. German forces, caught between Bastogne's resilient defenders and the advancing Third Army, began a disorganized retreat. Tanks were abandoned, vehicles disabled or destroyed, and soldiers either fell back in haste or surrendered to the Americans. The streets, once contested fiercely, were now littered with the detritus of combat: wrecked panzer tanks, burned-out trucks, shattered artillery pieces, and frozen casualties left behind in the hasty withdrawal. The air carried a mixture of smoke, gunpowder, and the metallic tang of blood, yet over it all floated the quiet, almost surreal sense of survival. Bastogne had endured. The small town, encircled and beleaguered just days before, had withstood the might of 5 German Panzer divisions and the relentless assault of elite infantry. Every barricade held, every ambush executed, and every man who endured the freezing nights had contributed to a defensive victory whose consequences extended far beyond the Ardennes. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe moved among the troops, observing the relief with restrained pride. He had witnessed exhaustion, courage, fear, and defiance, and now he saw the fruits of leadership tempered by adversity. Soldiers surrounded him, offering brief words of gratitude, smiles breaking through fatigue, and, in some cases, tears of relief. McAuliffe's calm demeanor, his refusal to surrender, and his strategic foresight had become the linchpin of Bastogne's survival. The 18,000 men under his command had resisted overwhelming odds, improvised defenses, and brutal winter conditions. Yet they had never wavered. Their determination, combined with his leadership, had turned what seemed an inevitable defeat into a pivotal moment in the Ardennes campaign. Each soldier, from paratroopers of the 101st Airborne to hastily pressed engineers and clerks, had played a critical role, and now the town, though battered, could breathe. The logistical challenges of relief were immense. Fresh supplies were distributed as quickly as possible, ammunition to replace what had been fired in desperate defense, rations to sustain the exhausted troops, blankets to prevent further frostbite, and medical equipment to treat those who had endured days without adequate care. Artillery was reinforced, positions were strengthened, and scouts were sent to monitor any remaining German movements. Coordination between the relieved troops and incoming units was critical to ensure that momentum was maintained, and that the Germans could not exploit temporary confusion. Engineers cleared streets of debris, repaired barricades where necessary, and restored communication lines, ensuring that Bastogne could function not only as a defensive stronghold, but as a springboard for counteroffensives. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Americans, the relief marked the culmination of days of courage and perseverance, reinforcing trust in leadership and in one another. Morale soared, even among the wounded, as the sense of isolation and imminent defeat dissipated. For the Germans, the failure to capture Bastogne as planned disrupted the timetable of the Ardennes offensive. Commanders had anticipated a swift fall, believing that encirclement and supply shortages would force surrender within days. Instead, the prolonged resistance, the ingenuity of the defenders, and the timely arrival of Patton's Third Army inflicted delays that rippled across the front, allowing Allied forces to regroup, stabilize defensive lines, and prepare counterattacks. The strategic consequences were significant. Bastogne's survival prevented a breakthrough that could have split Allied forces, threatened critical supply lines, and altered the trajectory of the campaign in Western Europe. Streets that had been scenes of intense urban combat now bore witness to restoration. However tentative, the soldiers cleared rubble, repaired barricades for future use if necessary, and recovered fallen comrades for proper care. Tanks and artillery pieces, some damaged, were salvaged or replaced, and communication lines were re-established with nearby Allied units. The snow, still falling gently, seemed to soften the harshness of the streets, though it could not erase the memories etched into every corner. Yet, in the hearts of the men, a deep sense of accomplishment persisted. They had survived, endured, and ultimately contributed to a defensive victory that would resonate through history. Celebrations were quiet but meaningful. Small groups gathered around fires, sharing warm meals and coffee, recounting moments of bravery, improvisation, and humor that had lightened the darkness of siege. Letters from home, once impossible to receive due to encirclement, began trickling in, bringing news, comfort, and reminders of the lives the soldiers were fighting to protect. Each shared story, each laugh, each moment of relief became a thread in the tapestry of collective memory that defined Bastogne's defense. McAuliffe oversaw the integration of incoming forces, coordinating positions, distributing reinforcements, and ensuring that no gap in the defenses remained. Tanks moved into positions to cover key approaches, infantry secured the perimeter, and scouts surveyed surrounding forests for any lingering threats. Communication with higher headquarters was re-established, allowing for accurate reporting of conditions, casualties, and enemy movements. The Americans, though relieved, remained vigilant, understanding that the battle for the Ardennes was not yet complete, yet buoyed by the certainty that their immediate survival and the town's defense were assured. German withdrawal left visible traces of the ferocity of combat, streets pockmarked with craters, walls scarred by artillery, vehicles frozen in place, and the occasional abandoned weaponry serving as stark reminders of the struggle endured. American troops moved carefully through these zones, both to secure the town and to respect the fallen on both sides. Engineers began clearing obstacles, restoring order, and preparing the town for continued occupation and use as a defensive hub. Bastogne, though battered, had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and strategic foresight, its story destined to be recounted in military histories, personal memoirs, and the collective memory of those who had fought and survived. Patton's forces continued to press the German flanks, pursuing retreating units and recovering lost ground. The combination of relief within Bastogne and pressure from the Third Army disrupted German cohesion and forced reallocation of resources, weakening their broader offensive in the Ardennes. The siege had ended, but the momentum generated by Bastogne's resistance and the timely arrival of reinforcements created conditions favorable to the Allies, setting the stage for counteroffensives that would push the Germans back across Belgium, Luxembourg, and ultimately into Germany itself. Soldiers paused to reflect amid the relief, recognizing the extraordinary nature of what they had endured. The interplay of leadership, courage, determination, and ingenuity had created a defensive victory that was more than tactical. It was emblematic of the human capacity to endure extreme adversity. Stories of individual bravery, quick thinking under fire, and camaraderie circulated, forming a narrative that would inspire both contemporaries and future generations. By nightfall, Bastogne was secure, the immediate threat neutralized, and the men, though exhausted, could rest with a measure of safety. Fires burned steadily, medics continued their work, and supplies flowed more freely than they had in days. The soldiers, huddled in shared spaces for warmth, understood that they had participated in a battle that would be remembered not for the ground it covered, but for the indomitable spirit it revealed. McAuliffe's leadership, the resilience of his 18,000 men, and their refusal to surrender had turned what seemed certain defeat into a pivotal defensive triumph. Maps would later reflect the strategic importance of Bastogne, illustrating how the town's defense disrupted German timetables, delayed their offensive, and allowed the Allies to regroup, stabilize the front, and eventually launch counterattacks that drove the Germans back across Belgium and into Germany. Bastogne, battered, bloodied, but unbroken, stood as a monument to courage, determination, and leadership. Its streets, once scenes of intense combat, now became symbols of endurance. The snow that continued to fall seemed less a curse and more a silent witness to the tenacity and heroism that had unfolded over days of relentless siege. Soldiers, leaders, medics, and engineers alike understood that their collective effort had achieved something remarkable: survival against overwhelming odds, the defense of a critical position, and the preservation of hope amidst one of the harshest campaigns of the war. The story of Bastogne would endure, chronicled in history, remembered in the hearts of those who fought, and honored by generations who recognized the extraordinary courage it had demanded, a testament to what men could accomplish when leadership, determination, and human spirit converged under the harshest of conditions. Years later, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe returned to Bastogne, now a peaceful town where snow had given way to wildflowers, and the streets that once echoed with gunfire were quiet. Monuments and plaques commemorated the 18,000 men who had defended the town against overwhelming German forces in December 1944, reminding visitors of courage, unity, and steadfast resolve. Survivors shared their stories with children, historians, and fellow citizens, emphasizing the ingenuity, leadership, and resilience that had allowed them to endure brutal cold, scarcity, and relentless attack. Bastogne had become more than a military stronghold. It was a symbol of the human spirit, demonstrating that even in the darkest hour, determination could defy the impossible. For McAuliffe and his men, the memories were bittersweet. Victory had been achieved at immense cost, lives were lost, yet their stand had altered the course of the war, leaving a legacy of bravery and hope that would endure for generations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.